Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Matthew Worwood.
And my name is Dr. Cyndi Burnett.
This is the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast.
On this podcast, we'll be talking about various creativity topics and how they relate to the field of education.
We'll be talking with scholars, educators, and resident experts about their work, challenges they face, and exploring new perspectives of creativity.
All with the goal to help fuel a more rich and informed discussion that provides teachers, administrators, and emerging scholars with the information they need to infuse creativity into teaching and learning.
So let's begin.
Hello, and welcome back to the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast. It's August, and we want to prepare you for the upcoming school year. So Matt and I have each identified an episode from our past 10 seasons that we think would be helpful to you in your preparation for the upcoming academic school year. So, Matt, who have you selected? What episode have you selected? And what season is it from?
Well, Cyndi, I selected an episode from season 3 of the podcast because I wanted to make sure it was an episode from one of our first few seasons of the show, and it is with Dr. Frank LaBanca. Now, the reason why I selected Dr. Frank LaBanca, who's an administrator and also a high school biology teacher, was because I was writing a little bit about Frank in one of the chapters for our book that we're hoping is going to come out in early 2026. And the chapter's around modeling creative behavior. But that's not actually why I selected the episode. The reason why I selected it is because I think within this episode, Frank is expressing or embodying the creative teacher that he is and the creative person that he is. He is sharing stories of his creativity that exist in the classroom, as well as stories of his creativity that exists outside the classroom. And most importantly, what I really like, and it's something that I wrote about, is that Frank seems to be very much committed to working on shared inquiry with his colleagues, his students, and also his daughter, as he's kind of talks a little bit about a story where they're building a chicken coop together. And so the reason why I brought it up is I was thinking, as educators going into this new academic year, where are the opportunities for you to embark on a journey of shared inquiry with your students? Now, it might be that it's around a new generative AI platform that you don't know how to use, and perhaps you're going to go on that adventure with your students, and you're kind of like going to be open about that. I don't know where we're going to go with this, but we're going to explore it together. Or it might be that you're going to identify an open-ended question for a project, but you're going to make a commitment to identify a question that you're excited to answer as well, and you want to participate in that journey with your students. And I suppose I'm going to connect it a little bit to our chapter now, because I think by going on that journey of shared inquiry with our students, we're in a position to model how we learn and how we ask questions and how we seek information as we engage in a process of creative problem solving. So that's why I selected this throwback episode, and I hope you enjoy it. He is the founding principal of the Westside Middle School Academy Magnet. Previously, he was the director of the Center for 21st Century Skills at Education Connection, a company that I worked for, as well as a 16-year high school biology and science research teacher. Dr. LaBanca has also taught and supervised research at the university level in both biology and educational leadership. He has published over 60 peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, white papers, and research conference presentations. He is one of the few public school principals nationally that teaches his own class with students. Frank, welcome to the Fueling Creativity podcast.
Matthew and Cyndi, it is so great to be with you today, and I really am honored and humbled that I'm able to join you today.
Well, it's great to have you, and I want to jump straight into the discussion because, I know you personally as a highly talented and an incredible, passionate administrator, but one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you onto the show is to really dig into this inquiry-based learning, which was such a significant part of your strategic planning when founding the school. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what you mean by inquiry-based learning and why you prioritize this approach over other approaches that may have been available to you.
Sure, that sounds great. So I think, when I think about inquiry or inquiry-based learning, I use a really simple definition. Inquiry is questioning and investigation. And, in that simple elegance, it's a wonderful way to approach learning because children can ask meaningful questions and seek their own idiosyncratic, diverse methods to try to solve those problems. In education, there's lots of talk about problem solving, I think. And we do a good job with that. We get kids involved in things. We ask them to generate approaches and prove and document and record, collect evidence. But to me, the real point of inquiry is asking the meaningful question. And that process of asking meaningful questions is at the heart of what we try to do at the school and allow students to develop questions that are important to them, but important to a community at large. And however they define that community, I think is really important. So we ask kids to develop questions, spend a lot of time working on that development of questions, and then let them solve those problems that are interesting to them.
So, can you tell us more about how you go about teaching students to ask those meaningful questions?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting point that a lot of times questions are given to students, right? And there's lots of reasons why questions are given to students. It might be because that's curricularly mandated, or there's a limitation of time, or you're just trying to drive students toward a specific learning task or outcome. However, developing the questions is such an important creative process that I think is ignored in a lot of cases in schools, because developing questions take time. I think, the biggest curse a teacher can do for students is say, okay, gang, tomorrow what I'd like you to do is come up with 3 ideas for your project. I think that's a terrible, terrible instructional strategy. The reason I think it's a terrible instructional strategy is because there's no time to think. There's no time to identify or determine if there's a limitation to that question, or if you have the expertise or resources, access to the people that need to help you solve those problems. Developing questions takes time, and students need and deserve the time to go through that process of evaluating questions. And that doesn't happen in a minute or in a night. That takes place over an extended period of time. And so in our school, that's particularly important, that we spend a lot of time developing questions and doing research to make sure we are understanding the constraints or the boundaries, so we can develop something that is ultimately very meaningful for study. And questions that are developed very quickly for a project are very rarely super meaningful. There's got to be a background to it, a development process that gets you to that meaningful question.
Frank, I love what you're saying. And it brings me back, Matt, to our conversations with Natalie Nixon about curiosity and wonder, and Jeffrey Davis, who we also interviewed, who wrote about wonder. And while they are creativity practitioners, what they're talking about in terms of allowing time for curiosity and questioning allows us that reflection and that deep, meaningful acquisition of knowledge that I think is so important and so often missing, especially in our public school systems.
And I'll build on that, Cyndi, because I made that connection, but then another connection I made as well is, Frank, you'd referenced the community piece as well. And I remember a really early conversation we had in season 1, Cyndi, with Ron Beghetto, and he was talking about this concept of beautiful creativity. And one of the things that he was talking about in regard to beautiful creativity is when not only are we kind of like working toward a novel outcome that's addressing a problem, it's addressing a problem that has an impact outside the classroom environment. So you've referenced this concept of providing time and conducting research. Frank, can you really kind of like be explicit? What does that process look like? Like, what are some of the activities that students are doing when they're engaged in this early part of the process?
Sure. So let's take more of a specific example. So we have a STEM academy at our school, and we challenge the STEM students in 6th grade to conduct an investigation to come up with an invention. And in our 7th and 8th grade, they conduct an authentic applied science or engineering research project with the purpose of developing something. So, you might say, I have an interest in the environment. But then, what does that really mean? But, taking that interest and then digging deeper on that interest, I think is key. So if you're interested, I think, there's been a lot of talk lately about plastics in the environment and microplastics. That's attracted a lot of students. They have an interest in the environment. That's a very, very popular area, but how do you refine and refine and refine? So if you're interested in plastics or microplastics in the environment, then what do you know about that, first of all? See, I think a really important part of inquiry is you learn to do and about at the same time. So if we're learning to do, we're doing that investigatory process, but about, we're going to learn good content at the same time. Like, like I never want to see a project where kids are playing music to plants, because there's not a good basis of science behind that. So you can do the to do part, but then you kind of lose the about part because you're not learning good science knowledge in the process. So if you're in this process of trying to examine microplastics, then maybe you're going to find some good articles about microplastic. And maybe some of them are primary sources, or maybe some of them are secondary sources. And you're going to source those articles, and you're going to do some work around that. And you're going to gain more information, and that's going to refine your ideas some more. And maybe you're going to look at what some other people your age or older might have done in terms of investigations they've conducted, and seeing what kinds of work they've done. And then maybe you're going to evaluate yourself to say, is this a technical project in nature? I.e., I'm going to take a process that someone's done, and I'm going to just repeat that process. Maybe you're going to investigate who would care, like who's my audience for this project. And if audience is teacher, that's usually a weak way to go. We want to think about bigger things than that. My audience is the local environmental community. Maybe it's the medical profession. Maybe it's it could be anything in terms of who is going to care about my research. And I'm going to maybe talk to some of those people, because communicating with others who have expertise, I think, is really important in the process of developing the idea too. So we're going to take a multi-pronged approach. It's going to be research. It's going to be reading. It's going to be talking with others. It's going to be evaluating if it's a doable process. So if you have this project and it's a great idea, but you can't manage it and make it happen, well, maybe it's not such a great idea for you at this moment, at this time. So all that process has to take place in the problem-finding process where students are developing ideas for study.
So, Frank, how do you help teachers develop the capacity for developing and managing and implementing such a high-quality project-based learning environment?
Now, I think there are multiple facets to helping teachers in this process. And I think one of the ironic ones in the process is that we want teachers to not be the evaluators in this process. And you say, well, what do you mean not be the evaluators in the process? We want them to have someone else evaluate the kids' projects. So one of the key things I think we do to help teachers is we create an environment where kids are going to showcase their work to an authentic audience of practitioners. And whether that be practicing, in my previous example, practicing science and engineers, or in the case of our humanities global studies environment, maybe some historians at the local historical society, they're going to evaluate the projects. And that changes the role of the teacher. And I think part of the role change of the teacher is that the teacher is now the facilitator, because someone's evaluating them sort of in the process. And they get to change who they are with kids. Their job is to help those kids produce the highest quality project that's possible. And so that I think is important, creating an environment for teachers to do this work. I think also is giving planning time for teachers. Teachers are so stressed in the works that they have to do. And so we give them time to collaborate with each other for the very purpose of helping students develop and manage the projects that they're doing with the students. I think that's really important. And then providing professional development for teachers in the venue of project-based learning is important. What are the pedagogical moves you want to make as a teacher to be successful in creating an environment for your kids? And then I encourage visits too. So we have students that collaborate with each other, teachers that collaborate with each other, and changing the unspoken or maybe fake rules of education. Oh, it's supposed to be this way. Why does it have to be this way? We can be non-traditional in the way we approach the work we do with kids to give them a unique, authentic experience. Their voice is really important. Teachers have such great expertise, and helping them manifest that expertise so they can do this work with students is so important.
So, Frank, I think you said something that is super important from the perspective of trying to bridge the gap between creativity practice and creativity research. And we had a conversation in season 1 with Vlad Glavinu, who's done a lot of work around social cultural perspectives of creativity. And so when you're talking about teachers not being the evaluators, how I interpret that is you're recognizing the fact that as we're trying to encourage students to go about making an impact in the real world, to address a problem in the real world, then it's very, very important to have the people who are evaluating and determining to what extent is that idea going to have an impact on the world being people other than the teachers. Because we know that other people in an environment is going to impact and influence the creative process. And therefore, a student in your school is not necessarily designing a solution for it to be evaluated by the teacher, perhaps thinking about whether or not they're going to get a letter grade at the end of it to determine its success. Instead, they've got the ability to say, look, we're engaging in this process and our product is going to be evaluated in the real world. And I'm just wondering, does that piece of the puzzle at your school, do you see that having an impact in terms of how the students go about, number one, identifying problems, but number two, how they evaluate their own work as well?
I do think so. Some of the work I've done has looked at what kinds of products are produced by students. Maybe you can call it like a taxonomy of inquiry products that exist. This is actually work that came out of my dissertation work in terms of like what kinds of things are students producing. And I remember students saying to me once, well, I have this idea, but you know what? It's just a technical project. It's not novel enough. So I want to step back. Like he had evaluated enough other projects that students had done to say, I want mine to be more meaningful. And our students take great pride in showcasing their work. A lot of the work the kids do gets showcased outside of the school as well. So we participate in some state and regional and national events where students can showcase their projects, like History Day and science and engineering fairs and invention conventions. And our students take great pride in taking that work out of the school and performing at very high levels with it. And there are students that want to be that student. I always find it amazing, though. High performing kids can be high performing. However, I'm in an urban school, so we have lots of kids that are multiple grade levels behind. And how are we artificially defining that? They are behind in reading levels or mathematical performance, and yet some of these same kids who are behind in grade levels, when put in an authentic situation where they are able to identify the problem and produce meaningful results and explain it in context to them, can be very, very high performing. So I'll never forget, we had students a couple of years ago, two students, a young man and a young lady, who were both in our reading intervention. So reading more than 2 grade levels below, as measured by some sort of standardized test. And they were really excited about doing projects. And I worked with both of them. I was able to mentor both of them. And both of them performed very highly at our school level, that the school identified their 2 projects to move on to a state level competition. And they went to the state level competition, and the state level competition, all public schools, private schools, suburban, urban, rural, across the state. And both of those students placed as finalists. So they were in the top 20% of the state competition. And I think not only developing the efficacy of those kids and their self-confidence was such a part of it, but they were able to showcase work that they had done, that they had identified, developed, and solved at a level above most high-performing suburban schools in the state, which to me is such an exciting thing. It's not all about competition. It's about giving the kids the opportunity to do something that's interesting and exciting to me. And if they get the perk of high performance at another level, well, that's just really exciting too.
What a wonderful story. So I imagine that in starting this new school, and you mentioned the role of teachers being facilitators, that it's different when you're hiring new faculty. So how did you go about selecting the faculty for your school? Were you part of that team to select? How did you select? Were people not a good fit naturally? Are some teachers afraid of being a facilitator instead of the sort of sage on the stage that we typically think of as a teacher?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a real perk to being able to start your own school because you're intimately involved in the hiring process. But I think more importantly for me was really creating a clear vision and mission of what I wanted the school to be and the school to do. We wanted students to not just be consumers of information. We wanted them to be producers of information. We wanted good, high quality technology integration so they could be producers, not just, looking stuff up, as I like to say. So in the process, I can identify in the interview process, first of all, I can set my expectations for what I want a teacher to be in an interview process. And so that's part of it. And then I can ask questions that ascertain whether or not that's going to be a good fit or a good match. And that's the philosophy we want to bring to the school. And, not everyone's a good match. And there's differences of how people approach instruction. But I've been very lucky, I think, in the sense that a lot of people have seen and understood my vision. And I think I've been in the lucky position that a lot of my faculty sees and understands the vision and mission I'm presenting and are on board with me to really develop our school in that way. I'm not the principal that sits in my office pushing paper. My job is to be the instructional leader, to be out in the building, working with teachers and providing them with good feedback, providing opportunities for them to see each other and get feedback from each other. And then I think really important too is being a classroom teacher myself. I teach a section of engineering at my school. And I think when teachers come and see me doing that, it sets a great example. And also, it holds me to the same standards. In the morning when I forget to submit my attendance, I get that same call from the secretary that all the teachers get. Submit your attendance. And, it just keeps it real. I'm doing it, they're doing it, and they can see me do it if they want to do it. I remember once we were doing some sort of build project, and I had a number of saws in the lab in the classroom, and it was loud, and it creates, you cut wood, it makes quite a distinctive smell. And then all of a sudden people are like wandering down. They want to know what's going on in my classroom. And to me, that's exciting because then my teachers can see me in the process of managing a project-based classroom environment where kids are learning to do and about at the same time. And they can use me as not only a mentor, but as an example of how to do this process.
Frank, before we go on, I've got to ask a question that I keep kind of like dwelling over. We've interacted with a few different administrators, and you listen to the administrators, and it seems to me that the administrators we've had on the show kind of feel like they really get it. They understand the importance of engaging students in authentic learning experience, engaging them in projects that are having an impact in the real world. But there's also seems to be this disconnect because I'm sitting here and I'm like, why is it there's so many administrators talking like this? But then if I speak to a teacher, they're going to talk a little bit about that scripted curriculum, and they're going to talk about these standards and accountability. And so I wonder if you could just speak to this disconnect. Why do you think that Cyndi and I find it so easy to identify with administrators that seem to really get the value of creativity and the value of engaging students in this experience, but from a teaching perspective, they still feel that their hands are held a little bit. They want to provide these experiences, but they feel like they're struggling to do that a little bit.
As a building administrator, I think I'm faced with a lot of challenges, especially in a large urban district. You have the district pull, and the district pull is, we want you to do X, Y, and Z. And then I have my own philosophical approach to how I want to do things. So I have to balance what I want to do with what I'm obligated to do in the role of the district. And so I would be lying if I didn't say that there are curricular requirements for teachers that are tighter than I would design as an instructional leader or as teachers to do. My job in that case is to advocate for them and their autonomy and independence to allow them to do what's best for kids. And I think part of the challenge there is, maybe we'll get into a little more education philosophy on this, is that we need to collect information that demonstrates efficacy or lack thereof in order to justify making instructional choices and instructional moves. So the work I'm working on right now with my administrative colleagues is to really determine is how do we go through this process of, one, identifying what is valuable information that tells us something about students, and how do we use it to effectively inspire change in the process to get students to more project-based learning. And there's a lot of work that goes into it from my end too. And I happily take on that work at times, almost to a detriment, I think, because there are other things I have to do in my job requirement as a principal that are organizational management aspects when I'd really just prefer to spend time working on the instructional leadership aspects of the work. However, I would be remiss without saying that you can learn really good knowledge. You can learn really good skills by doing a project. You don't have to use traditional didactic methods of teaching and instruction to teach literacy and numeracy. They can be taught very effectively in the context of a well-designed project or project-based unit.
So, Frank, I alluded to this earlier in the show, but we've worked together as colleagues. You were my supervisor at Advance. And I remember when I was working with you, I was always super fascinated by the kind of creative projects that you did outside the classroom. For example, I think I recall rightly that you was working with your girls on a chicken coop at one point. And I just remember you being super excited about this work outside. So my question is, I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your creative work outside of education. And more importantly, do you think those creative endeavors provide you with tools that you can utilize in your professional context as well?
Doing projects is a part of who I am as a person. So regardless of whether we're doing it in an instructional setting or we're doing it at home, I think that kind of work has always been very exciting to me. Even from when I was a student and I had the opportunity to get into some projects, that was where my real learning took place. When I was in college, I did work on the Human Genome Project. And right now, we've kind of built our personal project world up a little bit at our house. My younger daughter is now a senior in high school, and she has designed, and we are building a tiny house right now. And I love mentoring her in the process, but at the same time, I'm always thinking of the educational moves that are happening in the process, how she's now using trig without me telling her how to do it, to figure out the pitch of the roof, to figure out how long the rafters are supposed to be and where the angles are supposed to be and what is going to be aesthetically pleasing. And so how she went out and found a mentor who was an architect who could way better than us figure out what the front of a building should look like, and how she took graph paper and designed things. And so being involved in that collaborative process with her has been a lot of fun for me, because I love doing that kind of work, and she loves doing that work as a prospective budding engineer herself. But also, there's lots of learning that takes place for both of us in the process.
And do you find that you being able to express yourself creatively outside your professional context provides you with opportunities, or at least motivates you to be creative inside your professional context as well?
I think so, but maybe they're not distinctively separate from each other, because professionally I want to grow and have my teachers grow as well. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to conduct projects within my school myself to develop teachers and myself. So I'm going to continue to be a writer, and I love to write and write about educational topics and research that I've done and conducted. So I get to grow professionally by doing that. But at the same time, it gives me time to think of how we can advance project-based learning in a school environment in a very practical way. Or if teachers collaborate together to observe each other and then look for trends within our school environment, we can do that in a project environment ourselves. And then that translates to, or it hopefully at least translates to, the ability for teachers to use these strategies that we use collaboratively as adults with their students.
Thank you, Frank. Well, we're running out of time, but we have been so inspired by this conversation with you today. Before you leave, we'd like to ask you a question we ask all of our guests, which is, what are 3 tips that you would give to educators or administrators out there who want to bring creativity into the classroom?
I think the most important one is spend time problem finding. It is so important to work with students and not rush them through the process of developing ideas for study. And that takes a long time, and it's okay to do that. It's okay to spend time developing ideas, because you get to be creative and really develop meaningful work, which in turn comes out the other end. I think the other thing is, as a teacher, don't be afraid of what you don't know. When I was a neophyte teacher, when I first started teaching, Disney's movie Pocahontas had just come out. And there's a line from one of the songs, you'll learn things you never knew, you never knew. And I think that that line has inspired me throughout my professional career. It's okay that I don't know the answers to all my students' questions. In fact, it's kind of exciting, because then maybe we can go find the answers together. And for teachers to have the comfort and confidence within themselves to know it's okay not to know the answers, but be the expert in facilitating the process so we can find answers collaboratively together. I once heard I was in a classroom with a teacher, and a student said to her, "Mrs. F, I don't know how to do that." And she said, "You know what? Neither do I. Let me know when you find the answer to how to do that." It's okay to do that with students. And lastly, there's a continuum between developing ideas and solving ideas. Don't be just dedicated to just solving problems. Develop the ideas and solve them in meaningful, rigorous ways.
Beautiful. What a way to end the show. Well, thank you again, Frank, for joining us today. If you have any questions about this episode or questions you'd like to ask us in future episodes, please send an email to questions@fuelingcreativitypodcast.com. My name is Dr. Cyndi Burnett.
And my name is Dr. Matthew Worwood.
This podcast was produced by Creativity and Education and in partnership with dadsforcreativity.com. Our editor is Sina Yousefzadeh.